The call for help. The Great Galactic Council was in turmoil. Representatives from countless alien races filled the vast chamber, their voices buzzing like an angry swarm. They had all gathered here, not for a celebration or a conference, but for something far more urgent. Their galaxy was dying, consumed by a ruthless enemy, the Silicon Swarm. The swarm was not like anything the Council had ever encountered. It was a force of pure destruction, a vast, ever-growing army of metallic creatures that consumed entire planets, breaking down everything in their path, including entire ecosystems, civilizations, and life itself. The more they destroyed, the stronger they became, assimilating resources and turning every planet into a lifeless husk. At the head of the council chamber stood Elder Draxon, an ancient representative from the Psiones race, his body covered in smooth, translucent scales that shimmered in the dim light. His eyes were deep, pools of wisdom, but today they were clouded with sorrow and fear. He gazed out over the assembly of his fellow leaders. Many of them were already defeated, their faces showing the grim truth: this was a battle they could not win alone. "We've failed," Elder Draxon's voice was heavy with the weight of his words. "We've lost too many worlds, too many lives. Our forces are scattered, our defenses crippled. The swarm is unstoppable." A murmur of agreement spread through the room, but no one dared to speak. The truth was too painful to acknowledge. The galaxy's once proud peacekeepers were no more. No weapons, no strategies, and no alliances had been enough to stop the relentless advance of the Silicon Swarm. From across the room, an alien representative rose, a being of pure light, shimmering like 1,000 stars. It was Zimera, the ambassador from the Luminari. Her voice was like a soft melody, but even her tone could not mask the desperation in her words. "We must act quickly, or we will all fall. Our best ships have been wiped out. Our forces have been shattered. The swarm doesn't stop. It will not rest until all is consumed." The room grew heavier with the realization. No one had any solutions. Their technology was powerless against the swarm's superior might. They had no answers, no way to stop the unstoppable. Then, from the back of the room, a quiet voice broke through the gloom. "I may know of one solution." All eyes turned toward Junior Representative Lyra, a young human woman who had recently been given a seat at the table. She was still new to the council, but her eyes sparkled with the kind of unshakable confidence only humans seemed to possess. She had witnessed things others had not: the brutal and chaotic wars of Earth, the resilience of humanity in the face of impossible odds. Yet even her own people had never been tested like this before. Elder Draxon's voice was tinged with skepticism. "You wish to suggest a solution, Representative Lyra? Tell us. What could your species possibly do to halt the swarm?" Lyra stood tall, her hands clasped in front of her as she activated a holographic display in the center of the chamber. The image that appeared was Earth, a beautiful, blue and green planet filled with lush forests, towering mountains, and vast oceans. It looked peaceful, serene, but that was before humanity had learned the true cost of survival. "Humans," Lyra began, her voice steady and clear. "We've faced extinction before. Our planet is a death world, full of dangers that would kill most life forms within days. We have battled natural disasters, violent climates, and fierce predators. We've built civilizations from the ashes of our past mistakes, and we've fought wars against each other that left our world on the brink of collapse." The council representatives listened closely. They had all heard of humanity's violent history, of the countless wars fought on Earth. But what made the humans different? Lyra's hologram shifted to show images of humanity's most intense struggles, battles against overwhelming odds, great wars that left entire nations in ruins, yet somehow, humanity always found a way to fight back. The images shifted again, this time showing humanity's triumphs, defeating great powers, toppling tyrants, and defending their world against invaders. "We don't give up," Lyra continued. "We adapt. We improvise. We learn. When faced with enemies stronger than us, we find a way to turn the tide. We don't rely on brute force alone. We rely on our creativity. Our determination. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the chamber. Could it be? Could humanity truly have what it took to stand against the silicon swarm? There's more, Lyra said, flipping through her display. New images appeared, showing the technology humanity had developed over the centuries. Ships that could travel the stars, weapons that could tear through armor, and systems that could heal even the most devastating wounds. The technology was advanced, but it wasn't the most powerful that made humanity dangerous, it was their ability to think outside the box. We are a species that fights hardest when defending others, Lyra said. And we never stop fighting until every last one of us is standing. We may not have the most powerful weapons, but we have the willpower to survive. And that, I believe, is what the swarm will never understand. Elder Draxon's eyes narrowed, but there was a spark of something, hope, that flickered within them. He glanced around the room at his fellow leaders. The council was on the brink of defeat, but Lyra's words had ignited something in them. Perhaps the humans were their last hope. Perhaps they could turn the tide against the silicon swarm. You suggest we invite the humans to join our cause? Elder Draxon asked, his voice filled with both disbelief and cautious optimism. Lyra nodded. Yes. The humans may be young on the galactic stage, but they have something the swarm cannot counter, adaptability. They don't follow the rules, and that's exactly what we need. The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. The council was desperate. The silicon swarm was coming, and they had no other options. But could they really rely on a species that had never been tested in a war like this? Elder Draxon let out a slow sigh. Prepare a delegation. We will speak with the humans. As the assembly erupted in activity, Lyra's heart raced. She had just made the first step toward convincing humanity to join the fight for the galaxy's survival. But there was no time to celebrate. The swarm was coming, and the clock was ticking. The humans had no idea what was coming, but soon, they would have to face the greatest battle in their history. The human response. The skies above Earth darkened as the alien delegation descended, their massive ships blocking out the sun. Panic spread across the globe like wildfire. Governments scrambled to respond, military forces on high alert, and civilians took shelter in fear of what might come next. No one had expected this day to come, the day when aliens would arrive, not for peaceful exploration, but for a desperate plea for help. Captain Jack Miller stood on the roof of a secure government building in Washington, D.C., his eyes squinting against the sudden darkness cast by the alien ships. He'd seen his share of combat, terrorist attacks, enemy invasions, and natural disasters, but this was something entirely different. This wasn't just another mission, this was the unknown, the unexpected. And it sent chills down his spine. A voice crackled in his earpiece. Captain, we have confirmation. The ships are broadcasting on all frequencies. It's not a threat, but we don't know their intentions. Miller clenched his fists. The unknown. The most dangerous kind of enemy. He looked over to the other military officers who were stationed with him, each of them equally tense, but none willing to speak their fears aloud. The message the aliens had sent was simple, yet it carried the weight of something much more dire. We come seeking help. We bring knowledge. We bring warning. It was then that the full scope of the situation hit him. These weren't invaders. They were desperate. They needed something from humanity. But what? In a high-security meeting room, leaders from the United States, China, Russia, and several other nations had gathered to discuss the alien message. Miller had been invited as part of the military strategy team, but this wasn't a situation he had trained for. No one had. We've studied their message, General Thompson from the Pentagon began, her voice sharp and steady. It's clear they're not here for conquest. They've seen the footage of our world, of our struggles. They know we've fought wars for millennia. But this is different. She flicked a button on the table, and a large holographic screen came to life, displaying the same footage the Galactic Council had shown. Worlds falling to the silicon swarm, planets reduced to rubble, and entire species fleeing in terror. They claim to be on the verge of extinction, Thompson continued, her voice tinged with skepticism. And they want our help in facing an enemy we know nothing about. They've said we have something they need, our ability to improvise. Miller couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. Improvise? We've got weapons, technology, and tactics. What are they talking about? Another voice spoke from across the room, the voice of General Zhang from China. It's not just our weapons. It's our ability to adapt, to think differently. The aliens said it themselves. Their advanced technology and tactics have failed against the swarm. What they need is our creativity in battle. Miller leaned forward, processing the information. It was almost too absurd to believe. Humanity, who had barely made it out of their own solar system, was now being asked to face a galactic threat. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized this was no ordinary situation. The aliens were scared. Desperate. And they were putting their hope in human ingenuity. He glanced over at the hologram, watching the footage of planets falling. The swarm was unstoppable. Could humans really make a difference? Hours later, a massive holographic conference was set up in the United Nations headquarters in New York. The alien delegation, led by Elder Draxon and his young representative, Lyra, had made contact with the world's leaders. The room was tense, the air thick with uncertainty. Captain Miller stood at the front of the room, his eyes locked onto the alien representatives. "Thank you for your cooperation," Elder Draxon began, his voice smooth yet heavy with a sense of urgency. "We have come to you because there is no one else left to turn to. We are on the edge of annihilation. Our fleets have failed, our defenses shattered. We need help." Lyra stepped forward, her eyes focused on the human leaders. "You are our last hope. The silicon swarm is unlike anything you have ever faced. It is a relentless force. It adapts to every attack. It is not stopped by any weapon or technology we've tried. But, we have seen something in you. The humans. You have a unique ability to adapt. To think creatively. That is why we have come." Miller felt a knot form in his stomach. This was it. The moment that would define humanity's future. Could they really rise to this challenge? He cleared his throat and spoke. "So, let me get this straight. You want us to fight an enemy that has wiped out your fleets. With technology we've never seen. And you think we're going to improvise our way to victory?" "Yes," Lyra answered simply. "Your wars, your history, your survival stories, all of it shows that you can adapt. When faced with the impossible, you find a way. That is why you must lead the charge against the swarm." Miller paused, the weight of her words sinking in. Humanity's history was full of improbable victories. From the trenches of World War II to the landing on the moon, humans had always found a way to rise to the occasion. But this was different. This wasn't just one battle, it was the survival of the galaxy itself. "We will fight," Miller said, his voice steady. "But we need more than just words. We need information. We need to know everything about this swarm. How do they fight? What weaknesses do they have?" Elder Draxon nodded solemnly. "We will give you everything we know. But time is not on our side. The swarm approaches. And soon, it will be too late." As the meeting continued, Miller couldn't shake the feeling that the fate of the galaxy now rested on the shoulders of humanity. This was the moment. The human race had always been fighters, but this time, the battle wasn't just for Earth. It was for the survival of every living being in the galaxy. Back on Earth, the response was swift. Nations quickly coordinated with the alien representatives, pooling resources, knowledge, and military strategies. The call had been made, and humanity had answered. The only question now was whether they could rise to the challenge. Would they prove that their creativity, resilience, and determination were enough to save the galaxy? Captain Miller stared out at the horizon, the massive alien ships still hovering above Earth. It was a strange feeling, being part of something much larger than himself, larger than humanity. But one thing was certain, Earth wasn't going to sit idly by. The battle for the galaxy was about to begin, and humanity was ready to take the first step. The war begins. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Humanity's leaders scrambled to absorb the information provided by the alien delegation. Thousands of scientists, strategists, and military personnel were mobilized, all tasked with understanding the threat of the Silicon Swarm and how they could combat it. The atmosphere on Earth was thick with uncertainty, but there was also a growing sense of resolve. They had been given a chance, perhaps the only chance, to protect the galaxy from extinction. Captain Jack Miller found himself thrust into a leadership role. His years in the Army Rangers had prepared him for combat, but this was unlike anything he had faced before. He was no longer just fighting for Earth, now, he was leading the charge for the survival of countless worlds. And despite the overwhelming odds, he was determined to succeed. In a secure military command center deep underground, Miller sat at the head of a table surrounded by the world's top commanders and alien experts. The screen in front of them showed real-time footage of the Silicon Swarm's advance, an endless sea of mechanical creatures, each one seemingly more powerful than the last. Their ships, shaped like massive insectoid husks, moved with an eerie precision, consuming everything in their path. "This is what we're up against," General Thompson said, her voice grim. "Their ships move in perfect formation. Each unit supports the others. They are a hive mind, each individual part of the swarm is linked to the whole. Their strength lies in their unity and adaptability." Miller leaned forward, studying the holographic display. "How do we fight them? We can't just send our troops to their deaths." "We don't know yet," Thompson admitted. "But we do have something they don't, improvisation. We're not tied to rigid battle strategies. We can think on our feet, adapt, and use our enemies' strengths against them. That's what the aliens believe, and I think they're right." A younger officer, Lieutenant Sarah Rivers, spoke up. "The swarm doesn't follow a traditional battle pattern. They don't use formations or tactics the way we do. It's as if they react to what we do in real time, countering our every move." Miller's eyes narrowed. "They adapt faster than we do." "Exactly," Rivers said. "And that's what makes them so dangerous. But, if we can break that pattern, if we can outthink them, there's a chance we can win." Miller stood up, his mind racing. "We need a plan. Not just for defense, but for an offensive strike. We can't just sit here and wait for them to come to us." The room fell silent as everyone processed his words. Finally, General Zhang, a stern-faced officer from China, spoke. "You're right. We need to hit them before they hit us. But how?" "First, we need to understand them," Miller said, turning back to the holographic display. "We'll start by analyzing their behavior patterns. Once we understand how they react, we can manipulate the battlefield. We'll create situations that force them to make mistakes, where their adaptability becomes their weakness." The room hummed with energy as the plan began to take shape. Every person present knew the stakes. They weren't just fighting for the survival of Earth, they were fighting for every species, every world, and every star system threatened by the Silicon Swarm. The first phase of the human counteroffensive began on Earth itself. Using the technology gifted by the alien delegation, humanity had developed advanced spacecraft, energy weapons, and shields. The global coalition launched a series of military strikes against the swarm's advanced forces, testing their theories of improvisation in the field. Miller, now commanding one of the human fleet's flagship vessels, stood at the front of a war room, watching the live feeds of the battle unfolding above Earth. The human forces moved with a mix of precision and chaos, launching unexpected attacks and feinting in different directions to confuse the swarm. At first, the battle seemed to be a disaster. The silicon creatures adapted quickly to humanity's new tactics, countering each move with terrifying efficiency. But Miller and his team weren't ready to give up yet. They knew the key wasn't just the technology, it was the human spirit. They had something the swarm could never understand, the will to survive, the drive to protect those they loved. "Hold your positions," Miller barked into his comms. "We can't let them dictate the fight. Keep them off balance." The ships moved unpredictably, darting between asteroids and space debris, launching hit-and-run strikes against the swarm's formations. Miller could see the strategy beginning to work. The swarm, for all its strength and unity, couldn't keep up with the humans' chaotic tactics. They were forced to adjust constantly, trying to predict moves that seemed to come out of nowhere. "We've got them," Miller muttered to himself, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "Now, we just need to keep the pressure on." But the battle wasn't over. The swarm, though thrown off by the humans' tactics, wasn't finished yet. The next wave of their assault would be even more brutal, and humanity would need to adapt once again. Back in the Galactic Council chamber, Elder Draxon and Lyra watched anxiously as the humans began to turn the tide. The alien representatives had never seen anything like this before. Humanity's ability to improvise, to adapt in the heat of battle, was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The galaxy's fate now rested on the shoulders of these Deathworlders. "They are doing it," Lyra whispered, her voice tinged with disbelief. "They're actually outsmarting the swarm." Elder Draxon nodded. "Yes, but this is only the beginning. The swarm will not be defeated easily. They will learn and adapt just as quickly as the humans. We must stay in contact with them, offer any support we can." "But will it be enough?" Lyra asked, her voice filled with doubt. "We can only hope," Draxon replied. "But for now, humanity is our best hope." On Earth, the battle continued to rage. Miller stood at the helm of his ship, watching the chaos unfold through the viewports. The human fleet had suffered losses, but they had given as good as they got. And in that moment, Miller knew one thing for certain: humanity wasn't just a Deathworld species. They were a force to be reckoned with. The Silicon Swarm had underestimated them. But it was clear now, the swarm hadn't encountered anything like humanity before. And that, perhaps, would be their downfall. As the battle pressed on, Miller's thoughts returned to the message the aliens had sent when they first arrived. "We come seeking help. We bring knowledge. We bring warning." The warning had been clear: if they didn't act, they would all perish. But the knowledge they brought was something far more important: humanity had a chance to save them all. And for the first time in a long time, Miller believed it. Humanity would rise to this challenge. They would fight, improvise, and do whatever it took to protect the galaxy. The war had only just begun, but Miller was certain of one thing: they would never give up. Not now, not ever. The tide turns. The battle raged on for days. Humanity's fleet was now fully engaged, and the stakes were higher than ever. The Silicon Swarm, relentless in their pursuit of destruction, pushed forward with mechanical precision. Every day, the humans grew bolder in their tactics, but the swarm seemed to adapt just as quickly. Their relentless onslaught continued, and despite the progress they had made, the question remained: would it be enough? Captain Jack Miller stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, humanity's flagship. His eyes were fixed on the holographic display in front of him, showing the ongoing battle above the Earth. He could see the human ships darting in and out of the asteroid fields, taking shots at the swarm's vessels, but it was becoming clear that they were losing ground. The swarm's ships were too numerous, and their tactics were too perfect. They were wearing the human fleet down, bit by bit. "Sir, we've lost contact with Alpha Squadron," Lieutenant Rivers reported, her voice tight with anxiety. They're getting overwhelmed. Miller's jaw clenched. This wasn't just a fight to protect Earth anymore. It was a fight for survival, for the survival of all life in the galaxy. The swarm was not going to stop. They had proven that over and over. If they were going to win this war, humanity needed to do something more, something the swarm couldn't anticipate. Send a distress signal to the alien delegation, Miller ordered. Tell them we need reinforcements. If we're going to beat this, we need more firepower. Understood, Rivers replied, and Miller could hear the urgency in her voice. Every second counted. He stood still for a moment, his mind racing. The human fleet was strong, but their technology was still a far cry from the advanced weapons the swarm wielded. They needed something more, something beyond what anyone had ever thought possible. And then it hit him. Lieutenant, bring up the tactical analysis of the swarm's movements, Miller said. I need to see their attack patterns again. The screen in front of him flickered to life, showing the swarm's intricate formation as it continued its assault on Earth. Miller studied the movements carefully. It wasn't just brute force, the swarm was following a very specific rhythm. A pattern. A weakness. The key to defeating them had been in front of them the whole time. We're fighting them the wrong way, Miller muttered, mostly to himself. What do you mean, sir? Rivers asked, clearly confused. These creatures, they're a hive mind. Every unit is connected, thinking as one. They don't react to pressure, they anticipate it. We're trying to fight them with the same tactics we've used against other enemies, but they're too predictable. We need to break their pattern by doing the one thing they can't predict. You mean, improvise? Rivers asked, her voice trailing off as the realization hit. Miller nodded. Exactly. The swarm reacts too perfectly. We need to create chaos. Unpredictability. They can't adapt to a fight that keeps changing every time they think they've figured us out. The room fell silent as the officers processed the implications of his words. It was a risky move. It was dangerous. But it was their only chance. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the alien delegation was monitoring Earth's progress. Elder Draxon and Lyra sat together, watching the real-time footage of the battle unfold. They had been in constant communication with the humans, offering advice and assistance, but they knew that humanity's true strength lay in their adaptability. It was a quality that the swarm could not understand, and perhaps it was their only hope. They're changing tactics, Lyra said, her voice full of both admiration and concern. They're abandoning traditional strategy and embracing unpredictability. Elder Draxon's ancient face was grim. It could work. But it could also backfire. If they fail, the swarm will wipe them out, and there will be no one left to stop them. But they have to try, Lyra argued, her eyes intense with belief. This is their chance to show the galaxy what they're capable of. And we have to trust them. Draxon stared at the images on the screen. I trust them. But I also fear for them. The swarm will not be so easily defeated. Back on Earth, Miller stood before his team, a fire burning in his eyes. Listen up, everyone. We've been playing by the swarm's rules, but that ends now. We're going to change the game. We're going to fight them in ways they've never seen before. We'll hit them where they're strongest, and then we'll strike where they least expect it. We're going to make them question everything they know about warfare. The officers around him exchanged glances, but they could see the conviction in Miller's eyes. It wasn't just a plan, it was a revolution. The humans were about to throw out everything they knew about combat and rewrite the rules of war. Lieutenant Rivers, Miller continued, I want every ship to go dark. No communications. No signals. We're going to send out a few decoy waves, but the real attack is going to come from the shadows. Rivers nodded. Understood, sir. The order was passed on, and soon, the human fleet went dark. The ships fell silent, their sensors barely active as they drifted into the void of space. It was a risky move, but the swarm relied on overwhelming their enemies with numbers and coordination. They had no experience with an opponent that could slip past their radar without a trace. As the swarm advanced, they did not notice the human ships slowly repositioning themselves, hidden from view. Miller's plan was working. The swarm was so focused on the main fleet that they were blind to the smaller, stealthier units now maneuvering around their defenses. The first phase of the surprise attack was set in motion. The silence was broken suddenly by a barrage of fire from the human ships. With laser precision, the humans targeted weak points in the swarm's formation, destroying several key vessels before the swarm could react. The first blow had been struck. But the swarm wasn't one to be caught off guard for long. As the human forces began to strike, the swarm shifted tactics, adapting to the sudden change in the battlefield. But they were too late. The humans had already anticipated their counterattacks. "Keep it up," Miller barked, watching the screens with intense focus. "They're reacting too slowly. Keep pushing them." The tide was beginning to turn. For the first time since the war began, the swarm was starting to falter. It was as though the hive mind had been fractured by the chaos the humans had unleashed. The alien delegation watched the human fleet's success with a mixture of awe and fear. They had known that humanity was capable of extraordinary things, but seeing it in action was something else entirely. "This is it," Lyra said, her voice filled with excitement. "This is the moment the galaxy will remember. Humanity has done what no one else could. They've thrown the swarm off balance." Draxon said nothing, but his eyes, ancient and wise, bore into the screen. "Let's hope it's enough. The swarm will not fall easily." And as the battle continued, it was clear that the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The final push. The battle above Earth was unlike anything humanity had ever experienced. The silicon swarm, once thought to be unstoppable, was beginning to show signs of faltering. The humans had thrown them off their calculated path, and for the first time, it seemed as if the tide was shifting. But while the humans pressed forward, their victory was still far from certain. Captain Jack Miller stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, his eyes scanning the vast battlefield. Despite the initial success, the swarm had adapted quickly. Their machines seemed to anticipate humanity's moves, evolving tactics with each passing minute. Miller knew that if they were to win, they needed to deliver a final, crushing blow, something that would put the swarm on the defensive and force them to retreat. "Lieutenant Rivers," Miller said, his voice low and focused. "How are we holding up?" "Not great, sir," Rivers replied, her voice tight with worry. "Our fleet is losing ships faster than we can replace them. The swarm is beginning to recover from our initial strike. We need something bigger, something bolder." Miller turned to face the display once more. He could see the swarm's ships converging, their numbers overwhelming. But in the chaos of the battle, he spotted an opening. A flaw in their formation. The swarm's movements, while precise, lacked the fluidity that humanity had shown. There was still one last chance to catch them off guard. "We're not going to fight them head-on," Miller said, his voice full of resolve. "We're going to hit them where it hurts." Rivers looked confused for a moment. "Sir, I don't understand. Their main force is already closing in." "I know," Miller said, a plan forming in his mind. "We're going to go after their command structure. We'll strike at the heart of their hive mind. If we can disrupt their coordination, we can collapse their entire fleet." Far away from the battlefield, aboard the alien ship, Elder Draxon and Lyra were watching humanity's strategy unfold. They had witnessed the brilliance of the human tactics, but the stakes were higher than ever. The humans had proven their ingenuity, but this plan was incredibly risky. If it failed, Earth would be lost. And with it, the galaxy's last hope. "This is madness," Lyra said, her voice trembling with fear. "If they attack the heart of the swarm, they risk everything. They could be walking straight into a trap. Draxon's eyes narrowed. They know the risks. But they have no choice. The swarm will not stop until everything is consumed. The alien elder watched intently as the humans began to reposition their forces. The ships that had been hidden in the shadows now emerged, forming a new strategy. They were moving closer to the heart of the swarm's formation, aiming directly at the core of the hive mind. "We must prepare ourselves," Draxon said, his voice filled with urgency. "If humanity succeeds, we may finally have a chance. But if they fail..." He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. The fate of Earth, and perhaps the galaxy, depended on the success of a single, daring human mission. Back on Earth, Miller's plan was set in motion. The human fleet, now reduced in size but still strong in spirit, moved with precision and purpose. They weren't going to confront the swarm head-on anymore. Instead, they were going to infiltrate the heart of the enemy formation. "We're going in," Miller said, turning to his crew. "This is our last chance. We've fought them with everything we've got, but now we need to disrupt their hive mind. We're going to destroy their communication center, break the bond that holds them together." The ships moved into formation, their engines glowing bright as they sped toward the heart of the swarm. With every passing second, the pressure mounted. The swarm's forces were closing in, but Miller had already calculated the best possible route. If they could reach the command center and deliver a crippling blow, they might be able to destroy the swarm's central processing unit. The communication link between the swarm's ships was their only weakness. Without it, the individual ships would lose their synchronization, and the swarm's power would collapse. Miller's fingers gripped the command chair, his knuckles white with tension. "This is it, people. We break them now, or we don't break at all." The fleet moved deeper into enemy territory, their stealth technology keeping them hidden from the swarm's sensors. But as they neared the heart of the enemy formation, a surge of panic spread across the human ships. The swarm was faster than they had anticipated. "We've been detected," shouted Lieutenant Rivers, her voice laced with panic. Miller's eyes widened as the first of the swarm's ships appeared on the radar, flanking their position. A few shots rang out, and explosions lit up the space around them. "Hold steady," Miller commanded. "We can't turn back now." They were outnumbered and outgunned, but Miller's resolve was unshaken. He knew they had to push forward. The fate of humanity, of the entire galaxy, rested on their ability to hit the heart of the swarm. Inside the swarm's central hive, the situation was becoming increasingly chaotic. The humans' assault was unexpected, and it was causing ripples in the otherwise perfect coordination of the swarm. But the hive mind, vast and ancient, had anticipated such an attack. It wasn't going to let a few human ships disrupt its plans. "Prepare for counterattack," the swarm's central processor instructed, its voice a hollow, metallic hum. "Deploy reinforcements." Tens of thousands of swarm ships were rerouted to intercept the human fleet. The battle escalated as the humans pushed further into enemy territory, desperately trying to locate the core of the swarm's command. Back on the Vanguard, Miller's heart raced as he watched the swarm ships closing in. They were now in the thick of it, dodging enemy fire and returning shots. The command center was just ahead, but there was still one final obstacle. "Reinforce the main guns," Miller ordered. "We need to punch through their defense grid." The Vanguard's cannons fired, launching bursts of energy that ripped through the swarm's defenses. The battle was fierce, and the outcome uncertain, but Miller had no intention of giving up now. Finally, the moment arrived. The human fleet, battered and beaten, pushed through the final line of defense. The heart of the swarm's hive mind lay ahead, a massive structure that looked like a floating fortress. They were almost there. The humans were about to deliver their final blow. "All ships, prepare to fire," Miller shouted, his voice filled with determination. In the next few moments, the universe would either watch as humanity fell to the swarm, or witness the moment the galaxy would forever remember. The stage was set for the final battle. Everything rested on the next move. Would humanity's creativity, determination, and willingness to improvise be enough to defeat the swarm? Or would this bold assault be their last stand? The heart of the swarm. The human fleet advanced toward the heart of the silicon swarm, their path carved through space like a razor through flesh. Every ship, every crew member knew what was at stake. They were no longer just fighting for their survival, they were fighting for the future of the entire galaxy. And, for the first time in their history, humanity stood at the precipice of something unimaginable, a war between species that could either herald their salvation or doom them to extinction. Captain Jack Miller gripped the controls of the Vanguard tightly. The ship's systems were down to their last reserves. The power cells hummed dangerously, and the hull was pockmarked with scars from the relentless swarm fire. Yet, there was no turning back. The heart of the enemy was now in their sights. "Sir, we're within firing range," Lieutenant Rivers reported, her voice crackling through the comm system. She sounded as calm as ever, but Miller could hear the edge of tension in her tone. Every human on the bridge was acutely aware of the thin line they were walking. "Do we have a clear shot at the core?" Miller asked, his voice unwavering despite the chaos outside. "Almost, sir. We need to disable their external defense grid first. Once we do, we'll have the opening we need." Miller nodded, a plan forming in his mind. "Take out their defenses. Let's open the way for the final push." The Vanguard and the rest of the human fleet adjusted course, closing in on the heavily defended structure of the swarm's central command. The heart of the enemy was a fortress, vast and imposing, surrounded by a complex web of shielded defense grids and automated drones that patrolled the outer perimeter. The swarm had built their home among the stars, and it had become as much a part of them as their hive mind. The human fleet accelerated, weapons firing in a synchronized barrage. The first few shots hit the enemy's outer defense grid, sending shockwaves through the space around them. But the swarm responded with swift precision. Their automated drones launched a relentless wave of counterattacks, and explosions rocked the human fleet as their shields flared brightly under the strain. "We need to break through now," Rivers called out. "Their drones are swarming us faster than we can handle." Miller clenched his teeth. "I know, just hold them off a little longer." Far above the Earth, aboard the alien ship, Elder Draxon and Lyra watched the unfolding battle with a mixture of awe and fear. The humans were pushing forward, their determination unyielding. But even Draxon could see that the odds were growing slimmer with every passing moment. The swarm was an enemy unlike any they had ever faced. Lyra's eyes were wide with concern. "Captain Miller, if they fail, it could be the end of everything." Draxon nodded gravely. "But if they succeed, they will change the course of history. No other species has ever fought the swarm this way, with such audacity and creativity. This is humanity's greatest strength." Lyra looked back at the tactical display, her voice soft. "They're running out of time." Draxon didn't respond. Instead, he turned to his crew. "Prepare for the next phase. We may have to assist them directly. The humans will need all the help they can get." Back on Earth, the humans were in full retreat, their ships battered and breaking under the weight of the swarm's counterattack. But Miller had seen this before, the swarm adapted quickly, and it was their flexibility that allowed humanity to outmaneuver them. It was a game of wits, and humanity was about to pull its greatest trick. "Ready the EMP pulse," Miller shouted over the comms. "EMP pulse ready." Lieutenant Rivers responded, her fingers flying across the control panel. The Vanguard systems began to charge up. The EMP pulse would temporarily disable the swarm's internal systems, if it worked. If it didn't, they'd be facing an even stronger, more coordinated enemy. There was no room for failure. They needed to stop the swarm's hive mind, even if it was just for a few moments. Firing EMP in 3, 2, 1. Rivers called. A pulse of electromagnetic energy erupted from the vanguard, cutting through the swarm's shields and disrupting the control systems of dozens of enemy ships. The response was immediate. The once perfectly coordinated swarm fleet faltered, their ships disorientated and sluggish. "Now's our chance," Miller barked. "All ships, focus fire on the central core." The human fleet unleashed everything they had. Missiles, energy beams, and plasma bolts rained down upon the heart of the swarm's command. The massive fortress-like structure shuddered under the barrage, the shields cracking like ice under pressure. But as the final blow was delivered, a shocking, deafening roar echoed through the communication channels. "It's still not enough," Rivers shouted in disbelief. The swarm's heart was strong, and their hive mind was beginning to re-establish control over their forces. The brief window of opportunity was closing fast, and Miller could feel the pressure mounting. If they didn't succeed now, all would be lost. "We need to get inside," Miller muttered to himself. "If the heart's shield holds, we'll never break through it from the outside." With a grim determination, Miller activated the final stage of the plan. The vanguard and several other ships veered off course, heading toward the weak points of the swarm's fortress. It was a desperate maneuver, but it was humanity's last chance. "All ships, follow me," Miller commanded, pushing the vanguard into the heart of the swarm's defenses. The humans had only one option left: boarding the enemy's command center and fighting their way through. Inside the heart of the swarm, the battle reached a fever pitch. The massive structure hummed with the pulse of the hive mind as its central processor, an enormous mechanical brain, began to reboot, quickly regaining control over the swarm's forces. The human ships, small and agile compared to the monstrous fortress, now swarmed the heart, attacking every vulnerable point with everything they had. "Get to the core, now," Miller shouted, guiding his team into the swarm's inner sanctum. They would have to fight their way through the structure, avoiding the automated defense systems and swarming enemy drones. Every second counted. Their survival, and the fate of the galaxy, depended on how fast they could reach the core and disable it. Far above Earth, Elder Draxon and Lyra exchanged a tense look. Humanity's last hope lay in the hands of Captain Miller and his team. If they succeeded in reaching the central processor and disabling it, they would cripple the swarm. But time was running out. "We must be ready," Draxon said softly. "If they fail, we must assist them. The humans have shown us that their creativity is the key to defeating the swarm. We must give them the means to finish this." The final battle was now in motion. The vanguard and its allies stormed the heart of the swarm's command center, their soldiers ready to face the unknown. They were on the verge of greatness, but also of total destruction. As Miller and his team closed in on the central processor, they had no idea what awaited them. Would they find the heart of the swarm vulnerable, or would they be walking into a trap from which there was no escape? The last stand. The battle within the heart of the silicon swarm was unlike any that humanity had ever faced. The air was thick with tension, and the hum of the mechanical heart of the enemy reverberated through every surface. Captain Jack Miller and his team, battered and bloodied from the chaos they had just fought through, stood at the threshold of the core. Their mission was clear: disable the central processor of the swarm, the very heart of their hive mind, or watch as the galaxy, including their own world, fell to annihilation. The interior of the swarm's command center was a labyrinth of dark metallic corridors, flashing with dim lights and pulsating with an eerie, rhythmic hum. The walls seemed to close in around them as they moved through the narrow spaces. Automated drones, once disoriented by the EMP pulse, had now regained their senses and were beginning to swarm. But humanity had learned how to fight the swarm in a way no other species could. Their tactics were fluid, their minds sharp, and above all, they had one advantage that the swarm could never replicate: unpredictability. "Keep moving," Miller commanded, his voice steady despite the weight of the situation. He led the way through the twisting corridors, his eyes fixed on the only thing that mattered now: the central processor. Behind him, his team moved swiftly, their weapons raised and ready for the inevitable encounter with the swarm's remaining forces. Lieutenant Rivers, Sergeant Calloway, and Corporal Jones followed, their steps heavy with determination. They were the best humanity had to offer, and now, they were humanity's last hope. Back aboard the human fleet, Elder Draxon watched the progress of the ground assault with a mixture of awe and concern. The humans had proven their resilience, but the swarm was relentless. Even now, the enemy's forces were regrouping, their hive mind working together to adapt and strike back. "We cannot wait any longer," Draxon said urgently, turning to Lyra. "The humans need us now." Lyra's eyes locked with his. "What do you propose, Elder?" "Activate the secondary weapon systems. We will launch everything we have left. We have to give them the chance they need." Lyra nodded, her fingers flying over the controls. The fleet's remaining ships began to position themselves into formation, charging up their most powerful weapons. Humanity had shown them how to fight the swarm, but now it was their turn to give the humans the support they needed. Together, they would stand against the swarm, or they would all fall. On the ground, Miller and his team reached the heart of the swarm's command center, a massive chamber filled with swirling energy in mechanical tendrils that seemed to reach out like the limbs of a beast. In the center of it all stood the central processor, an enormous crystalline structure, its facets glistening with an unnatural glow. It pulsed with life, as if the very essence of the swarm was contained within it. "That's it," Miller said quietly, his voice filled with awe. "The heart of the swarm." He looked at his team. "We've come this far. It's now or never." The processor was heavily guarded, but not by soldiers. Instead, mechanical constructs, creatures that seemed to be part machine and part living organism, guarded the entrance. Their eyes glowed a dull red as they turned toward the humans. The air seemed to crackle with anticipation as the drones began to advance. "Take them down," Miller shouted. The battle began in an instant. Miller and his team opened fire, their weapons tearing through the mechanical drones with precision. Explosions rang out, and the chamber shook with the violence of the clash. Every step forward was a battle, every breath taken with the weight of the galaxy on their shoulders. Sergeant Calloway was the first to fall, a shard of debris piercing his side as he threw himself into the fray. "Get to the processor," he shouted, even as he collapsed. "Don't stop." Miller nodded grimly, pressing on with a renewed sense of urgency. They couldn't afford to lose any more. Not now. Not when they were so close. Rivers and Jones fought like warriors possessed. Rivers fired her plasma rifle with deadly accuracy, while Jones used his fists and combat knife to carve through the remaining drones. But despite their fierce resistance, the tide of the battle seemed to be turning against them. The swarm's strength was vast, and their numbers seemed endless. For every drone they destroyed, 2 more appeared in their place. Meanwhile, above Earth, the human fleet and their alien allies prepared for the final push. The fleet had fired everything they had, but the swarm's forces were beginning to regroup. Every blast was met with retaliation, and it was clear that the swarm would not go down without a fight. "We're running out of time," Lyra said anxiously, her hands trembling as she monitored the battle below. "If we don't assist them now, we may lose the entire fleet." Elder Draxon, however, was resolute. "We have given them the chance to succeed. The humans will find a way. They always do." Back on the ground, the team had finally reached the central processor. Miller stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. It was now or never. "Stand back," Miller ordered. He pulled a device from his belt, a last-ditch weapon designed to disable the processor. It was a long shot, but it was their only option. He attached the device to the processor's core, and the room trembled as it began to hum. The central processor seemed to come alive, its crystalline form glowing brighter and brighter. It knew something was coming. It knew it was in danger. "Everyone, fall back." Miller shouted. The team turned and sprinted for cover, knowing they were seconds away from what could either be the end or their salvation. The device activated, sending a pulse of energy into the core. The processor shuddered, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then, with a massive explosion of light and sound, the heart of the swarm detonated. The shockwave sent the humans flying, knocking them to the ground, but as the dust settled, they realized the impossible had happened. The swarm's central mind had been destroyed. Up above, the fleet watched in stunned silence as the swarm's command structure collapsed. The drones stopped moving, their coordination lost without the central processor to guide them. The Silicon Swarm had been defeated. Captain Miller and his team, battered and bruised but alive, gathered their strength and stood in the aftermath. They had won. Against all odds, humanity had defeated the most fearsome force the galaxy had ever known. Elder Draxon's voice echoed through the comms, filled with pride. Humanity has proven itself. You are no longer just a species. You are a force that will shape the future of the galaxy. Miller looked out at the ruins of the swarm's heart, his heart heavy with the weight of the victory. We did it, he whispered, but the reality of what it had cost them, the lives lost, the battles fought, still lingered in his mind. The galaxy would be safe, for now. But the humans had learned something that day. They were no longer just survivors on a death world. They were the ones who would lead the charge, the ones who would inspire others to rise up against impossible odds. Humanity had shown the galaxy that when they were called upon, they would answer with force, ingenuity, and unyielding courage. They had become the heroes the galaxy needed.